So can everybody hear me? Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Marie Howe, and I'm so glad to see everybody tonight. There's so many faces that are so familiar. We're so glad you're here. We're here to celebrate Richard McCann, the extraordinary, the magnificent, the unlike anyone else in the world, Richard McCann. And so we would like to begin, first of all, though, by thanking the Fine Arts Work Center for helping us gather here, for providing the platform where we can come together. Richard was a fellow at the Fine Arts Work Center twice, many years in between his two fellowships. And he was on the Board of Trustees for many years. He also taught at the Fine Arts Work Center for over 20 years with me and Victoria and Nick and Michael. And every summer we would come to the Work Center and teach together and be there. The Work Center is a home base for so many of us, and certainly it was a home base for Richard. You may have noticed when you registered that some of us have started a scholarship fund so that someone could come to the summer workshops for free, who needs to, who wants to come and can't afford it, in Richard's name. And when you go to the Fine Arts Work Center site, you can donate to that fund there. We also have an extraordinary announcement to make, which is, I've just learned myself, which is that Richard, this is from Joanne Jacobson, who you'll be hearing from in a minute. Richard McCann, in his will, left a bequest of $100,000 to the Fine Arts Work Center to subsidize a fellowship, a winter fellowship for a writer. And so that will be called the Richard McCann Prose Writers Fellowship, which will help to sustain a writer every single year in the winter program. So we have two different funds. One you can contribute to, which is for the summer scholarship, for the summer program, so that someone could come and take a class and have that paid for. And one we're just telling you about that Richard did on his own without telling any of us, that he was going to leave this money to the Fine Arts Work Center to support a writer during the winter fellowship. So we'd like to thank especially Kelly and Naya for their help in organizing, helping us organize this whole thing. Am I forgetting anything, Nick? I don't think so. Yeah, Nick is going to talk now for a minute, I think.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to say hi to everyone and welcome you all here. And I'm going to be sort of the MC, where I'll just sort of call on folks that want to speak. And some people have already put their names in the chat section. If you'd like to say something in the chat, we already have a few people lined up to begin us, and then we'll get to as many folks as we can. Hopefully we get to everyone. And we'll probably go for about an hour. We'll probably go to around 6:15 now, probably go until 7:15. So around 7:10, I'll turn it back to Marie. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to Joanne Jacobson, who's going to start us out.
I'm actually going to read from an essay of my own. It's called Thoreau's Body. It was Richard's favorite of mine. And it feels to me connected both to the still rawness of his final illness and to so many of the ways that he enlarged my life. His model of both determination and vulnerability, of really wild hunger for the world, his knowledge of the body's potential for heartbreak and for revelation, of course, his eloquence and his wit, and as this event testifies, his big, big love for so much and so many. So I am drawn to beavers for their patience and their will to repair. their ability to sustain. Over and over, they rebuild their dams when another animal or harsh weather takes down what they've made, breaks through the crust of mud and branches, lets water rush back in and wash out the beaver's work. I embody, illness tells me, a physical working thing like the beaver, fearsome and fearful, the leavings of uncounted generations of parents and children, of their hopefulness and their disappointments. Lonely to the end, Herman Melville reached out in an 1851 letter alarming Nathaniel Hawthorne with his intimacy. Whence come you, Hawthorne? By what right do you drink from my flagon of life? And when I put it to my lips, lo, they are yours and not mine. Flesh and bone, eyes and lips. The body can be broken, can draw us to one another, can mark the throbbing boundaries of our aloneness. We live in a world of disruption, migrating birds thrown fatally off course by urban lights and noise, the seas rising as glaciers melt. In Miami, salt water soaks suburban lawns, fish swim in low-lying parks. Pluto has been demoted from one of the 9 planets in the solar system that we see in the nighttime sky to a large rock orbiting the sun. To be ill, and I think this most of all is what I learned from Richard, is yes, to be similarly called out of the world that we count on, but it is also to be called more deeply into the world, to be immersed in its messiness and its movement, its ability to surprise and its mystery. The areas of the brain that control our most human functions, speech, memory, feeling, are called by neurosurgeons eloquent, the most essential to avoid damaging as they cut. But illness too is the body's eloquence, its own insistent language, moving and truthful. With my love.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Richard was always good at making what he called remarks. That was one of his specialties, was to make remarks. So we're going to be making remarks tonight. And Michael Klein is going to say something next. Michael.
Hi, everybody. So great to see you all. I'm going to read the beginning of an essay Richard wrote called The Resurrectionist, which is part of a book that he was working on when he died. It was originally published in Tin House, and then it was part of the Best American Essay collection of 2000. The Resurrectionist. Here is what happened. I was cut apart. The liver of a dead person was placed inside me so I might live again. This took 12 hours and 33 units of blood. But who was I afterward? I could still recall the body I had when I was 10, the body in which I carried what I called myself, walking along the C&O railroad tracks or crossing the divided highway that separated our house from the woods. A heavy, modest body dressed in husky-sized jeans from Monkey Ward and a brown corduroy car coat that my mother chose, identical to those my uncles wore back in the mining towns they lived in. I could recall the body I'd had, nervous and tentative when I'd first made love at 17. But these bodies were gone, as was the body into which I'd been born. These bodies I'd called mine without hesitation, intact and separate and entire. 6 months after my liver transplant, I flew to Nashville to visit my mother in the nursing home. She sat in a blue housecoat at a folding car table, spooning a Dixie cup of ice cream to her mouth. Marie, your son's here, the nurse kept telling her. But my mother wouldn't look up except to look through me. She'd begun her own metamorphosis since the last time I'd seen her, withdrawing into the form of a bony old woman who only sometimes recognized my brother or me. Is this your son? The nurse asked, a grade school teacher prompting a forgetful pupil. My mother shook her head. No, no. At night, I sat at her bedside. I'm here, I whispered as she slept. I made it through. I'm here. I didn't know if she could hear me. For a while, I tried to work on the letter of gratitude I was planning to send to the strangers the transplant coordinator referred to as my donor family, though I knew nothing about them or their loved one whose liver I'd received. I couldn't figure what to write to them that seemed neither too rehearsed nor too intimate, though I planned to repeat some remarks I'd heard in a support group meeting, thanking them for the gift of life and assuring them that the highest form of giving occurred as theirs had, when neither the donor nor the recipient was known to one another. For a moment, my mother shifted her blanket, murmuring in her sleep. I put down the pencil and closed my eyes. In just a second, I thought, she'll say my name. Mother, I said, though she said nothing further. I wanted us back as we had been, restored to what I felt were our real and original bodies. My mother smoking a cigarette on the stoop of her old house in Silver Spring, and me beside her with a bottle of Pepsi in my hand, though I knew if my mother were able to ask me what had happened to the liver I was born with, the one she'd given me, I sometimes imagined, for it had once been a part of her as well as me, I could have told her only what the surgeon had said. It was sent to pathology and then burned. I flew home the next morning. On the plane, I noticed the man staring at, as one by one I swallowed the half dozen immunosuppressants that kept my body from rejecting the organ as foreign. And for a moment, I felt a sudden strangeness, even to myself, as if I were a distinct biological phenomenon, constructed in a manner different from that of my fellow passengers, hurling through space in a pressurized cabin, drinking coffee and reading their magazines. I'm a liver transplant recipient, I told my seatmate. He wanted to know if my new liver was male or female or white or black. I said I didn't know. He said if it were him, he'd be sure to find out. But I didn't, or at least I didn't think so. And I was relieved when the plane began its descent. Somewhere over the Alleghenies, my seatmate had asked if I'd heard about the man with AIDS who'd gotten a liver from a baboon. No, I hadn't. But in my transplant support group, I had heard of recipients who'd waived their rights to anonymity to arrange what they sometimes called reunions, inviting their donor families over for Yarzit rituals and barbecues. And I'd heard of, I think that's Yarzite, sorry. And I'd heard of donor families who'd secured the names of recipients showing up unannounced on their doorsteps, bearing bouquets of mixed flowers and brightly colored Mylar balloons. Maybe it's kind of like discovering you're adopted or finding your birth mother, one woman said, confiding to our support group her anxious plans for meeting the mother of the teenage boy whose lungs she had received. No one dared the obvious. The mother was a mother of a child who was dead, even if his lungs were still drawing breath on earth. Sometimes I too fantasized that I had an alternate family that was eager to receive me as flesh and blood, especially as my mother retreated farther and farther into a world from which I was excluded, as when she imagined that I was her dead brother and called me by his name. But my fantasies of a happy meeting with a donor family were vague and unspecific, even less concrete than the fantasies I'd concocted as a child, waiting for George Maharis from Route 66 to pull up to the house in his Corvette, ready to speed me away to what I felt sure was my real future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was beautiful to hear, Richard. We're going to now go back to Marie to.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Michael. I met Richard in 1987. I was at McDowell, and I saw him from across a crowded room, and I fell in love with him right away. He was the coolest guy there, and within 2 days, my own brother, who had AIDS, but we didn't know it yet, became very, very, very ill. And I was in that little phone booth at McDowell getting phone calls from my family, which became increasingly urgent until my brother was in the ICU and no one understood what was happening. It was very, very serious. How could this be? And my boyfriend was coming to pick me up to drive me to Rochester, and I was waiting outside for hours, pacing back and forth, and Richard brought me out a plate of food. I went to Rochester. My brother actually did die, and he came back from being dead. He was dead for several minutes and came back. And when he was safe, I came back to McDowell, and Richard and I started a friendship that lasted over 30 years. Richard, of course, also knew about dying and resurrecting. He was so close to dying before his liver transplant. Those of us around him, you know, we didn't know if he would live long enough to have it. So I'm going to read the very end of the essay Michael so beautifully began, and The Resurrectionist. Here is what happens after the resurrection. Your body hurts because it's hard to come back to life again after lying so long in a grave. But you set goals and you labor to meet them, holding yourself up with your IV pole as you shuffle down the hospital corridor, slowly building back your strength. You learn your medications. You learn to pack your wounds with sterile gauze. You learn to piss into a bottle and shit into a pan. It's work preparing yourself for sunlight. Then the day comes when you're allowed to wash your hair and shower. A little while later, you're walking down a street. Yes, it's life again, your life. But it's not the same, not quite, or so it seems, because you can't forget how it felt to lie in the close darkness of the grave. You can't forget the acrid smell of the earth or the stink of the moldering grave clothes, especially now that you know, as you never did before, that you're headed back to the grave again, as is everyone. And you know this with a clarity you cherish and despise. The gift of life is saturated with the gift of death. Sometimes, sleepless at night, I imagine I'm back in the hospital the night of my transplant, lying naked in a cubicle behind a thin curtain, waiting for a nurse to prep me for surgery. This is how it feels to lie in a cold room, I tell myself, because this might be my last night on earth, and I want to feel everything, to feel once more how life feels, each breath in and each breath out. The nurse comes in and instructs me to lie on my side. She administers an enema. This is how it feels to be filled with warm water. I go to the toilet, and afterward, I look at myself for a moment in the bathroom mirror. When I return to the cubicle and lie down, the nurse says she must shave the hair from my abdomen all the way from my groin to my chest. I hope my hands are warm enough, she says, spreading the shaving soap across my stomach. She touches the cold razor to my belly, and I think, this is how it feels to be alive.
Thank you so much, Marie. I'm gonna read something now myself. I have a list of the folks that are going to be reading next, and I hope I don't surprise you, but I'll just say it quickly. Stephanie, Jack, Sky, Donna, Victoria, Janine, Marty, Matthew. So just so you know, so you're prepared, because the beginning folks, we all knew who was going next. So Richard, Richard, I met through Marie, again, 30 years ago. Richard gave me the title for my first book of poems, Some Ether. Richard was just a dear friend for a long time. And I think, you know, everyone here knows him in some way, and I'm sure everyone here loves him in some way, in different ways. The last year, since COVID, which has been now a year, we were part of a writing group. Many of us here in this room tonight were part of a writing group with Richard. So we got to hear the last things he was working on, which are really unbelievably beautiful. And so I'm going to read a piece from that he was working on when he died. The end of a piece called Waiting. Almost Easter. I'm lying on the unmowed spring grass in DuPont Circle with my friend Tim. To me, he's a rock in the cleft of the world I could hide in, to borrow some words from Blanche Dubois. The crocuses, purple and yellow, are blooming in the nearby flower beds. Here and there, some hyacinths. Here's what I worry about, Tim is telling me. I worry I won't have lived enough before I die. I know what Tim means. I'm with my nervous impatience, my hungers and desires. I with my nervous impatience, my hungers and desires. But as for me, I'm simply lying in the grass beside him. In the distance, I hear a boombox faintly playing a soul song. Today, I want only to lie on the grass. I want to drink in the world around me, every ounce of it. The half-dozen bike messengers sprawled beneath some Bradford pear trees. The pain-struck face of a homeless man walking in circles, barefoot, his feet bloodied. The office workers eating their lunches on the park benches. The men playing chess at the few small concrete tables. An old woman cursing as she scatters refuse from a trash bin. A couple of teenage girls with plaited hair selling chocolate bars to benefit their prom. Perhaps my donor is here among us. It's hard not to think of this man or woman on whom so much depends. For this stranger, wherever he or she might be, I have only begun to feel a mixture of fretful gratitude and sorrow. How can I help you, dear donor? I'm sorry my life depends on your death. Perhaps the donor is elsewhere in the city, standing at a payphone or hailing a taxi or crossing a street against traffic. Today he is busy. He waits for nothing. He is among the living. Other folks, I've made a little list of other folks that have in the chats whose names I didn't mention. I've made a list of all those folks too, and we'll get to you after this. But now we'll move on to Stephanie Grant.
Hi, everybody. Nick, I want your counsel. I have a story to tell rather than some reading, and it's a very bawdy story and a very funny and irreverent story. And I just wonder if it's
Yes,
the right moment in the evening.
This is the perfect moment for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that Richard could hold all of these things at once, but some of us aren't as talented as he was at that. So I knew of Richard through queer writing circles before I met him. He was responsible in large part for hiring me at American University, where we both worked, and he was my mentor. And in the first year that I was working there, it was announced, as it is every year, that the dean of the college would be giving a talk. And I didn't know if that was something that I needed to attend. So I went to Richard and I said, is this something that I really have to go to, the dean's talk? Is that something I should do? And he said, oh, absolutely. I'll go with you. And we went together, and not only did we go, but to a large auditorium, 250 seats. He paraded us down to the front row. He said, you have to sit in the front so the dean can see you. And so we all sat in the front. And then he pulled out his phone and introduced us to Grindr, which was brand new, absolutely new. And I had never seen Grindr. I hadn't heard of Grindr. And so he showed us the intricacies of Grindr, and we looked up periodically at the dean and smiled and looked back down to Grindr and at the very handsome men there. So now fast forward about 2 years, and apologies to people in the audience who've heard this story, but Richard was driving me to the metro. He had an assignation planned, and we were chatting, and he was very kindly dropping me off at the DuPont Metro. But he was on his phone chatting and arranging the assignation while he was driving. And I said, Richard, why don't I take the phone? I don't want us to have a crash. And so he handed me the phone. And so I would ask questions that the man asked, and Richard would respond, and I would type in his responses, and we negotiated safe sex and top and bottom and what you like and what you don't like, and kissing is very important, as it was to Richard, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this is going back and forth. And then the man says, are you hung? And so I turned to Richard and I said, oh, Richard, the man, he wants to know if you're hung. And Richard paused and said, oh, well, I think I need to take over now. I think I should pull over. I think it's time for me to take over this conversation, unless, of course, you can spell the word horse. That's my story.
That was a perfect time for that story. Thank you, Stephanie. Next up, we have Jack Pearson. Jack Pearson is up next.
Oh, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Nick, for ringleading. It's tough talking about Richard for me because I don't know. I feel like I don't like I could be wrong. I could be doing this to myself, but it feels like Richard was so gregarious and part of so many groups. And I felt like my experience with him was super solo. We did everything together. It's a testament to the Fine Arts Work Center and their mission that I met him there when I was a fellow, and I cross-pollinated with a writer that I probably would have had no other means of knowing. And I don't know, we just became like brothers for that winter. And Richard, like we all know, he wanted everybody to like him, and I tend to be like a little bit opposite of that. Like I can't. It's very hard to get me to group socialize, and this is difficult for me. And but he made it fun, and we hung out together a lot. And I guess by way of an anecdotal story, sort of might not have an end or a punchline, but it was what, 93 or 94. So I had just gotten the word that I was HIV positive, and he was like in the very beginning stages of being the liver transplant was on the horizon. We were both like feeling sickly. I didn't have any symptoms, but at that moment in time, it seemed like we were both on the way out. And he was pretty into the drama of being on the way out, and I wasn't so much, but like I liked, it was good for me to have that to play with him on, because whenever he would get dramatic, I could get dramatic, you know what I mean? I could one up him. And then weirdly, that summer we stayed around after the fellowship, and I took a cottage. And somehow throughout this summer, I started getting this weird rash, and it was horrible. And every place I'd scratch came up welts. And I went to the medical center a few times. And finally, the third time, they were like, we can't do anything else. Your throat's closing. You got to go to Boston. And so at last, I had this big drama to pull on Richard. And he was like, of course, I'm going to drive you to Boston. You have to get to Mass. I don't think it was Mass General. I forget where we went. Anyway, he's driving me there, and I was like really sick and asleep. And I thought, I kind of was thinking it was the end, or the beginning of the end. Like it had kicked in, it had gone from HIV positive to full blown. And so I get in the back seat and I'm sleeping. And then a little while later, I wake up and the car stopped. And I think we're like just over the bridge, and we're in a 7-Eleven or something. He's gone. And I was like, oh my God, where is he? What's going on? I was like only half awake. And he comes back out to the car, and I was like, where did you go? And he was like, he had Cheetos and some like Junior Mints and a pack of Newports and some Diet Pepsi. And I was like, you stopped? I'm dying. And And he was like, oh, come on, you know, it's a long ride. And I was like, yeah, and you should be getting me there. And so somehow, like, I use that for the next 20 years as a, like, you know, I was dying and you stopped for Cheetos and cigarettes. I don't know. It's somehow it worked for the both of us, and we just had tons of good times, and but it always seemed like the two of us. Like, I don't remember big parties. I remember him and I all the time doing something. He came to visit me in Florida one time. I remember I called Michael Klein. Like, I got the day wrong. Like, I thought he was coming, supposed to be there at noon one day, and he didn't show up, and I couldn't get in touch with him. And you know, somehow Michael Klein's the only person I knew that knew him. And I was like, is he okay? Like, because it did seem like all the time, it seemed like for such a long time, it seemed like touch and go with him, that I was always ready to hear the bad news for what felt like 10 years. And I'm just glad I got to see him a couple times in the last year. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack, so much. It's so wonderful to be here with everyone. So many people loved Richard in so many different ways. And like each one was like unique. I think the way that the relationships is that's what we're getting. Sky.
Let me pull up my notes here. I met Richard in 1991 at the Jurassic Artist Foundation in California. He was in the writers program and I was a live-in chef. This is where our friendship began, then continued in Provincetown. We used to make up stories and cast ourselves in the roles of the characters. Two of them stayed with us for 30 years. Richard called me Crybaby, and I called him Mr. Man. I love Richard, the vulnerable man, deep writer and blessed friend. Tonight I will read his poem, In the Health Room, from his book, Ghost Writers. My mother said her name meant Mother of Sorrows, and I lay in the health room hoping to be sent home. Helping me undress, the nurse said I saddened her. Lying in the dark on a cot behind a screen, I could hear the class next door where a record played. Then my mother came. We waded through the slush to the car and pulled off toward home, where I would mend and repaint my Japanese dolls' white bisque faces. I stand on the side of the road and watch them pass. The woman plans lunch and comments how the air is close. The boy unrolls his window to ease her. Her gloves are on the dashboard, soft leather veined with yellow thread. And for Richard, in Rumi's words, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sky. That was really beautiful. AKA Crybaby. I love that. Donna is up next. Donna Massini.
Hey, everybody. It's really, really wonderful to be here with all of you celebrating Richard. It's so moving. I want to talk about this past year. I met Richard in 1995, but this past pandemic year, for some of us, there was a kind of dailiness that we got. About a year ago, Michael Klein started a Friday group where we sort of met, just a few of us, maybe 8, and talked and checked in and maybe read a poem or something, or just checked in. and was a kind of a lifeline for all of us, and especially for Richard, especially for those of us who lived alone. And we're still meeting. And maybe a month or so after that, Ricky started a writing group out of essentially that group that met another day of the week on Zoom, bringing work, bringing poems, essays. And that too was Richard. In both of the groups, he was often the first person who showed up. He would just get there beaming, waiting, beautiful shirt. He would have his hair newly cut, beautiful glasses. In fact, I colored my own hair today because I know Richard would have noticed that I was sort of veering towards skunk hour. And I wanted to be nice for him. As Nick said, these essays he was writing and bringing in week after week drafts and pieces, so gorgeous, so metaphysical and restrained and factual. I mean, he would say to us, what do you want to know about transplant and organ donors? And we would write him questions. And it was a privilege to hear them and a privilege to be in those groups with him. I think in all the years I knew him, that was the first time we had such continual dailiness, and that I'm really grateful for. So what I've decided to do is to read a poem for Richard that I wrote and brought into our writing group a couple of weeks ago. Short poem. Window framed by waiting, for Richard. I can barely see the frozen lines of ice in the plastic bird bath, the orange half waiting for the mockingbird to return, the consoling snow. This is a ghost window. I hear but can't see the mourning dove on my fire escape. This is ice fog, my screen says, and explains the way ice crystals suspend, hang in the air, not to be confused with diamond dust, another kind of fog, but not the freezing fog called white death, dreaded embodiment, in which fine ice needles pierce the lungs, impossible to breathe. So many kinds of fog. I read and hoard these facts as if they might change what's happened. The heartbreak of the subjunctive, something you would understand. Fog, I learn, is not the same as mist. They differ in precisely how far you can see, what you would see. Dear friend, I'm in a fog. The radiator is hissing. My home phone won't ring. Dear friend, you are missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. It's been a good year writing with you. And now we're going to go to Victoria Riddell.
Hey, everybody. Is my mute off? Yeah. Hi, everybody. I think I've changed what I'm going to do because I want to make it shorter so other people can go on. But I guess one of the things that I think is that probably for all of us here, whatever our context was with Richard, there are maybe like 4 things or 5 things that are probably continuous, which is, or at least for me, and I'm guessing that this is true down the road for everyone. You know, I laugh some of my hardest laughing with Richard. And my guess is that's true for pretty much everyone here. And the other thing was that as soon as I met Richard, the turn became intimate. The conversation became intimate. And I don't think that was because he was choosing me as an intimate, because I think everyone here was an intimate of Richard's. But he had the gift of intimacy, and he invited that intimacy, and he made certainly me, and my hunch is this radiates outward, through that intimacy, feel that kind of specialness. It wasn't, he was as profligate with love as you could be in the best way, and yet you felt kind of incredibly special and beautiful in when he put the gaze on you. And the other piece of it is that with Richard, pretty much you could say anything and not a damn thing would shock Richard, probably because he was going to one-up me on the shocking thing that he might say. And so there was a kind of honesty that I adored, and that he gave to me. I loved also to teach Richard's work. I teach Mother of Sorrows all the time for my students. And, I just to break apart before this, Marie said, why don't you just parse a sentence of Richard's, and we would be here for a long lecture if I did that. But one of the sentences that falls in from the essay that Nick was reading from Waiting, I just want to read, and it's a sentence that appears in a parentheses. It's the essay he was working on just before he died, and in that paragraph he's talking about waiting for the liver transplant and flirting, and so the sentence ends with in a parentheses, and it was the sentence that after Richard died, I found myself repeating to myself over and over and over again. And the sentence is, and thank you, dear world that I crave, for showing me your bright and living face through his. So thanks.
So glad you read that sentence, Victoria. So it's such gorgeous. It really was a gift to get to hear Richard's brilliance in this last the last year of his life. How did you know, Janine? How'd you know? You're up next. How'd you know?
I just remembered that you said that.
Yeah, that's
I mean, how could I not remember that I was going after Victoria?
It's like magic. You just suddenly appeared.
That, it's been so beautiful to hear your poems this year, Victoria, every day. Amazing. It's so wonderful to see everyone. And I'm really struck at how I think I know probably almost everyone I'm seeing on this screen because I knew Richard. And like almost anything that matters to me in my life came to me because of Richard. Like that seems like hyperbolic, but I actually have tried to test that, and it seems true. Can I share my screen? Do you have that turned on? It's okay.
Yeah, I can turn it on.
Okay. I just had a few images to share.
Go ahead, it should be on.
Okay. I just wanted to start with this one from the Work Center class. Actually, I think it goes back a little further. This is from, Richard was my teacher in college, which is such a gift to have known him and to have so early encountered someone to whom language and truth mattered so much. So this was a flyer that we made for one of his readings. My friend Tina made these drawings from lines from him, and I just wanted to share that. And here's our Work Center class. I'm sure like many of these people are here tonight. His incredible life stories class. And I just wanted to share these lines. I'm just going to read part of it. I can share the link where there's actually his voice saying this. This was from an event I organized at the Work Center, at Zen Center. And he spoke with the liver pathologist, Neil Thies, who I would love it if Neil is on the call today, but I'm not sure that he is. But they gave a talk together called Across Bodies, and it was so beautiful to hear their conversation. And there was a moment in the call where, in the talk where Neil was talking about the prospect of the recipient's liver, the the recipient cells populating the new liver. And so Neil says, it's quite likely that your own cells have repopulated to some extent your liver, so that your liver is now actually your liver, not just your donor's liver. And Richard says, and vice versa, that my body is no longer completely mine, but both of ours. And Neil asks, how do you respond to that? Richard says, while you were saying it, I realized Facebook was open and I started typing it into my news on Facebook. Richard McCann is hearing brilliant pathologist Neil Thies say that : it's now up on Facebook. I guess that's a way of saying I felt exceptionally excited by that prospect, exceptionally excited. As you said that, you know, the antonym of that is there's a donor livered in Richard. Okay, the mathematics of that are that there is a Richard and it's a large set of something, and there's a subset called donor liver dropped into this other thing. That's actually a very confusing notion. It's how I think of things often, but it's fairly confusing because it maintains the bifurcation. So when you said that, I suddenly felt momentarily free from the idea of having to negotiate doubleness, which is something I have felt that I needed to negotiate after my transplant. And I just thought that was such a beautiful articulation of what he was experiencing in that moment of kind of regaining this sense, this idea of to be momentarily free from the idea of having to negotiate doubleness. And as I said, I can send you the link so you can hear that in his own voice. And that's an image from that talk. Richard Skyped in. This looks like it would be happening now, but this happened in 2010. And then I just wanted to just have this one other. I just found this today. And I think it's from when Richard was staying in my house one summer, the first summer I went to the Fine Arts Work Center. And he just left these little notes around my house that I found later. And it was just, I loved knowing in that first summer that I was at the work center, I loved knowing that Richard was in my house. And we had a lot of fun, conversations about gardening because he was not into gardening. He's like, I put some diesel oil on the garden. I'm pretty sure that's really good for it, right? And I was like, yeah, it's perfect. And I also just wanted to share these because these are Richard's mother's sunglasses that he gave me the first summer when I went to the work center, which was to clean the summer apartments. And I see that you're on the call, Dorothy. So I just wanted to say hi to you and just mainly thinking about Richard as such an incredible force of bringing people together, and it's so evident in this call. And I just want to close with an image of, like he was my teacher, like in college, and then, all through my life, like I just am constantly drawing on things that Richard alerted me to. And this is something that I often share with students, like this particular edit that he gave me in a piece where it was a piece that's set on like New Year's Eve on 2000, and I said some terrible line like, clocks around the world are striking midnight, and Richard, in a conversation, he was like, how about the clock in the kitchen? And that just feels like such an emblematic edit of Richard's, in that it just really brings us back to like what's actually in our own lives, and that it's an image for one thing versus some huge abstraction, but just that dearness of the ordinary, like what's actually around us. So I feel so hugely fortunate to know him and to have come to the work center through him. Yeah, when he was telling me about the work center, I had this dream of like coming to the work, like a literal dream, where I was in a classroom and there was like the tides were actually coming into the classroom, And there was like this white German Shepherd that was kind of moving in and out of the space. And that just feels somehow very connected to Richard, like the sense of like the tides actually being in the space where people are living and writing and teaching. He's so much like part of that landscape. So thank you so much, everybody, for organizing this, and just sending so much love to all of you.
Janine, it's so good to see you. Thanks,
Yay.
thanks for being here. Yeah, I think of teaching next to Richard when I'm at the work center teaching. The classroom would always be like just filled with laughter, just like burst into laughter. Next up is Martin Moran.
Hey everybody. My body is sort of humming, because I'm thinking of Richard's presence and body, which was always so big and visceral. To be really brief, because I know this love is just bursting through the Zoom and other folks wanting to share, that 23 years ago or so, I was my life was all about theater. I was an actor, and I remained so, but I went to an evening at Dixon Place to read some of my work at an evening curated by Michael Klein called Homo Text. It was really called Homo Text. And Michael Klein changed my life because he told me about the work center. And he said, even in those early conversations about Richard McCann, you should study with him. It took a while. It was that next fall on a bright October day that I met Richard in a classroom. I was dazzled by him, from everything I'd read and heard. And there was a sort of, as Victoria said, his gaze upon you. I felt his gaze, or I don't know what it was, but I felt like we were circling one another as these Irish Catholic, buttoned up altar boy, hypersexual Irish lads who loved to sing show tunes. And he was an extraordinary teacher, and I was very dazzled by him. And so for 20 years or more, I have started all my emails to him and texts as, "Hello, Sir Dahl, dear Sir Dahl." And it's all started that weekend when I would say, "Hello, sir," sort of when I was passing him, and he'd say, "Oh, hello, sir." And then somewhere, as things got loosened up, I somehow said, "Oh, Dahl, did you know?" And he said, "Which is it, sir or Dahl?" And it was born, Sir Dahl. And all the complexity, the moral complexity, the sexual complexity, it being a teacher, a friend, it just took my life and helped expand it so hugely. This circle of people I've grown to know. I'm so grateful for Richard. I will forever be grateful for the scribbles he made in the pages of my first book, which would turn out to be my first book, that he asked me to sing all the time with him, and that he asked me to rub his feet, and that he let me stay with him in DC. And I know all of us have such a singular relationship, but I felt like he gave me many clues about being a grown-up Irish altar boy, lad, Catholic kid with a body and a sex, and so many things that I'm grateful for. He's an extraordinary man, and I'm very blessed that he came into my life. And I just want to thank you all for being here, and thank dear Richard, who is so very present in the whiff of his smoke from his cigarette and in the laughter always. Thank you all for being here. So good to be with you and celebrate our dear friend.
Marty, thank you. Next up is Matthew Dickman. Matthew, I saw you come in.
Hey everybody.
Hi.
It feels amazing to be here with all of you. I want to read a poem I wrote for Richard, but first I just want to say that years ago when I met him, like so many other people here, I immediately fell in love with him. But I'm also a man who was raised without a father. So I was constantly looking for a father, and I met Richard and I thought, yes, this is the perfect father for me. And when Richard sort of caught that vibe, I remember one day he told me, I'm not going to be your daddy, but I'll be your uncle. And so from then on, he was Uncle Ricky, and he would send me in the mail a little like $1 bills, like 1 or 2 or 3, with a little note that said, my dearest nephew, go treat yourself to something nice. XO, Uncle Ricky, you know. So yeah, I miss my uncle. And yeah, this was written to him a couple nights after he died, after I got my sons to bed and was just sitting alone in the living room. Sleep. I don't remember what I was told when I was 8 years old and my grandfather died and his body was cremated, so it was no longer a big body made small by cancer, but a smaller body made insignificant by fire, a body of ash. I might have been told he was sleeping, and I might have been waiting in the rain at his funeral, watching the gold-colored urn of him being placed in a marble wall, waiting for him to wake up and become big again. I might have, in my little blue suit and black patent leather shoes, hoped that something, the sound of the rain, or an angel made out of wet grass and wet pine needles and the wet faces of the mourners, would wake him up. Tonight, I just want Richard to wake up. I want to be a smoker again and pull a lighter out of my back pocket and light the cigarette I just bummed from him while we stand close together under the evergreens in Vermont that shoot straight up through the rain and clouds. I want him to wake up and re-enter the gore of his body, its pink and gray anatomy, and find some clothes and find some shoes and walk across the earth and sit next to me, and sit next to Connie, and sit next to Ellen, and sit next to Sue, and sit next to Trini, Nick, Marie, and Michael too. And if he's too tired from being dead for 3 days, I'll go to him, naked in the undressing of my mind. Right now, my children are sleeping and will one day be dead in their lives. Right now, I am halfway through my life, and I will be dead as a mouse, as dead as any other creature. Right now, the only life I want back is Richard's life. I want the God of horizons and the God of lodestones and the God of drawbridges and caravans and mangers and money and mascara and dildos and the God of ships and fish and eggs and earthquakes and the God of all kinds of things wanted, to breathe him back and body him back and carry him back because, oh Lord, I loved him. But if he can't come back, if he can't ever wake up again, then I want nothing but his absence. I want that absence whole and warm and alive. I want to be able to sit next to it and hug it and talk about the shitty morning I had when I dropped the last of the milk and how it poured across the floor and how my youngest sat in front of his dry bowl of cereal and looked at me, and how I looked out the kitchen window just then and saw nothing. No sky, no trees, no birds, no rain, no cars, no yard, not even a neighbor's house. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That's an amazing poem. Next up is Rayford Keidel.
I feel embarrassed having heard and knowing that Richard had so many wonderful writer friends. I'm not sure there's much I can add, but I got to know him when I moved to DuPont Circle after a partner died, and a friend introduced us. I knew that he had a lot of friends, but he always made me feel special. He was like a very wise and supportive therapist, mentor, and critic. I've had a few little writing projects, and I would talk to him about being frustrated and stuck. And he would say, well, write about that. And the fact that he, went through so much horrible stuff, and he always found this raft of humor to hang on to. I'd had HIV from the very beginning, and I'd never gotten sick, never had the level of suffering that he had with all of his illnesses. But he initiated the standing joke between us regarding who was due the most sympathy on any given day. And I think I heard somebody else say the same thing. And one day, after years of we just decided to be completely honest with each other. And I felt like I could trust him completely. And after years of this closeness, he turned to me one day and said, Rayford, I really appreciate how unguarded and honest you are with me. And I think it's time I told you that all of the intimate things I've told you about myself, it's all complete fiction. And when they wouldn't give him enough pain medication, crazily thinking that it would cause him to become addicted, I suggested that he try marijuana. And he found that it helped him get through the day when he wasn't working and helped him sleep at night. So I'd bring over buds and batches of magic brownies. We'd order in food. Sometimes I'd get him to read me something he was working on, and we'd have deep discussions. Halfway through a sentence, one of us would forget what we were talking about, asking the other for help. We'd often reply, I have no idea. And then I would wander home, warmed by his brilliant wit and the sound of his laughter, and inspired by his courage. I taped some of these conversations with his permission, so I will have them to augment what will remain in my head and heart. And Richard, I want you to know how grateful and proud I am to have been your best friend. Thanks so much for this.
Thank you, Rayford. That was beautiful. Next up is Natalie Illum.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks, Marie. I was a student of Richard's in the MFA program from about 2001 to 2003. Not going to turn my camera on, but I think Richard would appreciate actually that I'm not going to turn my camera on because I don't feel pretty. But Richard was actually the first person to show and tell me that living in a medicalized body is something to be written about, is something to be shared, is something to be celebrated, or at the very least laughed over. And I've had a lifelong physical disability, and coming into the AU program during that time was the best thing that could have happened to me as a human. As a writer, Myra Skleroux was also my mentor and brought me to Richard willingly. They both taught me how to write about my body, even though it's something that I still struggle with. I think of Richard often. And I came to poetry by way of music, and my favorite musician is Joni Mitchell, and we would constantly sing The Last Time I Saw Richard, which for those of you who don't know, it starts out, the last time I saw Richard was Detroit in '68, and he told me all romantics meet the same fate. someday cynical and drunk and boring someone in some dark cafe. And metaphorically, I think that song is very much Richard. But I'm going to read a very brief poem that I probably wrote in awe of him, probably in about 2002. So we'll all take it with a grain of salt, including Richard, I'm sure, from the great beyond. It's called Things Shaped in Passing, which of course is after the anthology that he edited. I have no idea what the origin points were this far down the road, but I'll read it anyway. Things Shaped in Passing, after Richard McCann. 9 months before our flight to Oakland, a swallow falls from the sky as a gull sails toward a silverfish. A lightning bug goes opaque inside a jar. An old man lets go of his cancer. Years later, I tear a ligament like it was paper as some precious vessel breaks within you. You bleed slowly, a point without origin. There are no external signs of fear, of damage, just a bird overwhelmed in flight, a momentary plummeting before a light shudder, like a plane engine shuts down, like a swollen tear falling. Maybe we started hemorrhaging years earlier, during a kiss, a story you kept telling me. My words are not a clotting agent. Your silence is a cavern I was not expecting to travel into. Thank you. I will just say in closing that it is so comforting to me to hear how involved Richard was during the pandemic, both in his writing practice and connected to his community. It makes me feel so much better that, of course, that was occurring, but to hear about it just really makes the grief a lot easier. So for those of you who knew him very well, thank you for letting us know how it was in his last days. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for the poem, the beautiful poem. Paul Lisicki is up next.
This is a super short poem by Richard from Ghost Letters. And yeah, this is the private Richard. Night letter. Even if God touched me, I was alone. I thought, empty or full, I am alone. I meant to avow this emptiness, to practice what the saints had said, to leave a space inside, a breach for God. But at night you removed your gold band and set it on the dresser. You unclasped your bracelet, serpentine, with green stones. Your hands on my hands for a moment. It was as if God might be forgotten, as if he'd gotten what he wanted. Dear oblivion, if I could taste you again and drink you down, as once I did. I still recall not the desire, but its extinguishing. Nights with the bottle on the table by the window that overlooked the city whose streets I'd soon walk.
Thank you so much, Paul. Such a gorgeous poem. There's about 5 people left, so if we can, well, this is a suggestion of brevity for the remaining folks. So just to put that out there. And the next we have up is David I.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Marie. Hi, Paul, and lots of other people, familiar faces. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I do not want to look at my giant face. I have to change the view real quick. Much rather see your faces. They say, you know, there's no one like your first, and Richard was my first writing teacher. Summer of 2003 at the Work Center. The summer I also met Paul and Mark Doty and Marie, having no real idea who any of these people were at that point. And I brought a little story. I was thinking of leaving my acting career, and to be taken seriously as a writer by Richard and the other wonderful people in the workshop was life-changing, literally. And his generosity set the wheels turning for giant life change in the coming year. And then Robin Becker, I think she's on this chat, cemented it with her poetry class the following summer. The story I brought in was a little kind of a sketch, and Richard worked with me on it and the other writers, and went on to work with me on it beyond the workshop. And I'm going to read, and I think you'll see why, just the very end of the story, which is about a fellow that I lost to AIDS in '97. And we had letters, we had mail cross. By the time I got a letter from him, he was gone, and he never received a package I sent. And that's the center of it. And that's what this, I sent some incense and oil for healing, and well, I guess it didn't work. On a plain folded note card, Howard had written a short message. He loved talking with me, couldn't wait to see me. He signed off with, "Love you to pieces. Love you." Not, "I love you," or even "Love Howard," either of which would have been premature at the least, or so I suppose. I still wonder what our unread letters might have meant or begun if Howard had lived, what we might have discovered or rediscovered. But Howard died 20 years ago this fall, and every now and then I grieve a little. I'm still not sure why. He wasn't my lover and not quite a friend. Was it that on the verge of another chance with him, our third, Howard became another near miss, one more almost? Maybe my grief for Howard isn't about what we were or knew, but for what we didn't get to find out. At Howard's apartment, after I lit the Raphael incense and sniffed the oil, I read the note I'd enclosed. I meant to joke, "How do you suppose they figured out how angels smell?" But I'd misspelled smell, spell. I'd written, "How do you suppose they figured out how angels spell?" It got me thinking, maybe Howard was right. Maybe angels do exist. And we are each other's angels. Maybe I was one of Howard's, an angel with a spelling problem. And maybe Howard was and is one of mine. Thank you, Richard. You are certainly our angel.
Beautiful, beautiful, David. Next up is John Scoyles. Hey, John.
Thank you for this event. I met Richard in '93 when I directed the Work Center, and as Marie said, he came far after his first year. It was 20 years, I believe, that between, and he was like a bench coach for the fellows, I think, always ready with advice and humor. In fact, the two things that are evident here in his life are kindness and humor. If I had to think of two qualities that I loved and everyone loved in Richard, that would be it, and his mischievousness as well. And it's what's amazing about this gathering is everyone knows him in a special way. One way I did was, we're both born in 1949, a day apart. He's December 12th, I'm December 11th. I never knew what I would get in the mail from him. Always a strange, an ashtray from Venice or something like that, just an oddity. But he had that relation with so many people that was special and appropriate. I was thinking as this was going on, the only other person I've ever heard this remark about is Frank O'Hara. I remember at his service, Larry Rivers said, "I was his best friend," but so many people thought that about Frank. And The Mother of Sorrows, I love that book. And when I looked on my shelf, I had 4 copies because I bought so many to give away to friends. I just would like to mention what a terrific writer he was. Uh, I wanted to say something that's really struck me. In '93, he asked me how much money would it take to create an individual fellowship, and I said $100,000, and he said, "Well, I'm going to give that." It's like Richard. I'd never heard of it again until tonight. I forgot about it. In fact, in those days, the work center was on very shaky ground, and Richard would always pop in and make us laugh, mostly because he was just reading the new biography of Nico, Her Life and Lies, I believe. And every time he would come in with the book under his arm, he would sing part of Chelsea Girls, which brought us out of our doldrums. Anyway, he was just a wonderful, wonderful person. And thank you for the opportunity tonight to remember him.
Thank you, John. We'll go to Jackie Leiden.
Thank you so much, Nick, for hosting this tonight, and hello to everyone. I'm thinking of Richard like this rainbow because there's so many points of light at which I knew him. I'm sitting in Silver Spring, which he wrote about. We have the same beloved friend and agent, Gail Hockman. Many of you I know through him. He and Nick are sort of full circle in my life, and I thought that I wanted to read, and I will, just a really quick line from Liesl Mueller, but I went back as we were all chatting. By the way, at Yaddo, he also became engaged to Susan Orlean and two-timed me because he was engaged to me. So that, set up a lot of problems there. Anyway, I interviewed Richard for Mother of Sorrows in 2005, and I thought, I wonder if I can just find that. And I found out about this late. So I've put it in the chat. And in the intro, it's an 8-minute piece. Just try getting that on NPR today. I call his book a photograph delicately tinted. And
Thinking, is it a memoir? Is it a novel? Trying to find out if there was a clue.
So much, such a lovely remembrance. So anyway, if you can find it in the chat or just Google it. Here is what it would be: Leiden, McCann, NPR, 2005, Mother of Sorrows. I am thinking about him. I got to visit him in the hospital, one of his hospitalizations. Something that I think he would say and I think about this as a fellow memoirist from Liesl Mueller, because the story of our life becomes our life, because each of us tells the same story, but tells it differently. And none of us tells it the same way twice. So I know we all know Richard as a great friend and raconteur, and blessings to all of you.
Thank you, Jackie. And this is, we're gonna wind this up, this beautiful night up, this with Marie. Marie's gonna come back in to for the final word. So
the last 10 years or so, Richard and I used to say to each other a kind of mantra back and forth. I mean, we knew each other through so many boyfriends, so many ups and downs, and of course, so we would say to each other, right here as it is, right now as it is. And ever since, of course, he died, I've been trying to say that. The first 2 weeks, that was a hard one to say. But as somebody said, this space that maybe it was something someone read that Richard, no, it's a poem, the space that Richard occupies now enters all of us, and we carry him through the world with us. And it's just such a privilege to be here with everybody. It's so wonderful. So I didn't mean to put you on the spot, Marty. And I'll get right off it if you want me to. You want me to?
No, it's okay. I think that I hear Richard calling. Richard, it was a joy. He always, every time I saw him, he asked me to sing Danny Boy. I know it sounds crazy. I haven't sung in years. It's on Zoom. I have no idea how this sounds, but please join in if you want. But a soft, short version of Danny Boy. So, okay, this is for Richard standing on Heron Cove or in the parking lot at Fine Art Tour Center or at his birthday in Washington, D.C. every darn time. Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling. From glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses falling. It's you must go and I must bide. But come ye back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow. It's I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so. But when ye come and all the flowers are dying, if I am dead as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me. And I shall hear, though soft you tread above me, and all my grave will warmer, sweeter be. Or you will bend and tell me that you love me, and I shall sleep in peace until you come to.
Martin, thank you.
Blessings to Richard. He made me do it, dear Richard.
That was amazing.
Beautiful.
Incredible. Beautiful.
Thanks everyone for being here. That was such a perfect way to end. Well done. Really perfect.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Jack.
Hey, Jack.
Thank you, everyone.
It was great being with you guys.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for putting this together. It was beautiful.
Joanne, thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Stephanie, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Michael.
Michael.
Hey.
So much begins with Michael.
David, Stephen, David.
Marie Howe.
Marie.
Ah.
Wow.